In the red sands of Baal Secundus, under skies scoured by radiation and storms, a boy was chosen. His name, then, is lost to time. He was one of countless scavengers fighting for survival on the desolate plains. Lean, hungry, and feral. But even among the half-mad tribes and poison-choked wastelands, he stood out. Not for brutality, though he had plenty of that, but for restraint. For something more. His eyes did not burn with desperation, but with purpose. When the Blood Angels came, descending from orbit in thunderous dropships, they were gods made flesh. Towering figures of crimson armor and golden trim, warriors from myth. Many fled. He did not. He watched them, and they saw him. He was taken to the fortress monastery on Baal, tested, bled broken, and remade. One of the few to survive the brutal trials of gene seed implantation, psycho-conditioning, hypno-indoctrination, and the agonies of ascension. Among his fellow aspirants, he remained quiet, focused, not the strongest nor the fastest, but always present, always watching. When he emerged a full battle brother, his name was Calistarius. His path was never that of the common line warrior. From the earliest days in the 10th Company, his instructors noted the strange aura about him. In moments of tension, he seemed to react before the situation unfolded. In combat, his instincts bordered on preternatural. During one campaign against Xenos raiders in the Scourge Stars, a sanguinary priest watched Calistarius destroy a Xenos sniper's perch with a bolt pistol round. Seconds before the enemy even fired, he was tested for psychic potential and found not just worthy, but prodigious. The Librarian took him in. To be a psyker in the Imperium is to walk a razor's edge between power and damnation. For a space marine, that edge is thinner still. A single misstep, and the warp devours everything. But Calistarius, he walked it as if born for it. As a lexicanium, the lowest rank of the Librarius, he studied ancient lore and trained his mind to focus the wild torrent of the warp into precise battlefield-shattering abilities. His tutors praised his control. One said, "His mind is a fortress, but not one of stone. It is a blade. Sharp, quiet, deadly. But a blade, when sheathed too long, yearns to cut." His first true test came in 589 M41, during the boarding of the Sin of Damnation, a vast, derelict space hulk drifting into Imperial space. Auspex scans revealed it to be infested with genestealers, Xenos horrors of terrifying speed and psychic stealth. The Blood Angels mobilized immediately. For them, the genestealer strain was not merely a threat. It was a hated reminder of past losses, of ancient battles that nearly broke the chapter. Calistarius was assigned to Strike Force Raphael, led by the 1st Company Captain. Though still a lexicanium, he was selected as the mission's attached psyker, a rare honor for one so newly elevated. The 1st Company rarely tolerated unproven warriors in their midst. But Calistarius had already begun earning quiet respect. His calm under pressure, his clarity of thought, his ability to sense unseen threats, all made him invaluable. The Sin of Damnation was no mere ruin. It was a tomb, labyrinthine, cold and silent. The Blood Angels teleported into the heart of darkness, clad in Terminator plate, weapons ready. Calistarius, lighter armored and bareheaded to better channel his powers, moved among them like a shadow. His mind probed ahead through the metal walls, searching for the psychic echoes of alien minds. They found him first. The genestealers struck from vents, from walls, from floors. Claws tore ceramite, screams echoed in the dark. Bolter fire lit the corridors like lightning. Calistarius unleashed his mind, fire leaping from his fingers, kinetic force flinging chitinous forms back into the void. His abilities did not merely kill, they commanded the battlefield. He saw the flow of movement before it happened. He guided Sergeant Kalis's squad away from an ambush moments before it struck. He shattered a Genestealer Patriarch's skull with a blast of raw telekinetic energy as it lunged from the ceiling, but even victory left wounds. Of the 50 that boarded, only 23 returned. Calistarius was among them, silent as ever, the blood of Xenos and brothers alike on his armor. It was on the sin of damnation that the veterans began to look at Calistarius differently. He was not just a librarian in training. He was something else, something colder, focused, not detached, but distant, as though some part of him remained in the warp long after the battle was over. In the years that followed, his rank rose. He became an epistolary, then codicier. He learned the art of the blood rites, memorized the Codex Sanguinius, studied forbidden tomes under sanctioned inquisitorial license. He fought alongside Commander Dante in the Adrantes subsector, burning heretic psykers from the walls of the Palace of Ash. He once banished a warp entity from the mind of an entire hive city's population, without killing a single innocent. To the chapter, he became known as a loyal servant, reliable, brilliant, but always alone. Other librarians debated doctrine, argued warp theory, recited litanies. Calistarius listened, watched, memorized, then acted, a blade, quiet, sharp. The sanguinary priests noted his resistance to the flaw, the curse in the Blood Angel's gene seed that pulls them toward visions of Sanguinius's final moments. The black rage did not grip him as it did others. The red thirst, that gnawing blood hunger, seemed weaker in him. Some whispered that his psychic training had strengthened his soul against it. Others wondered if something else shielded him. But Calistarius never spoke of it. If he dreamed of Horus, of betrayal, of the angel falling, he never said. And then came Armageddon. A tide of green fury descended upon the Imperium's great industrial world. Gazkul Mag Uruk Thraka, warlord of the Orcs, brought a Wah, the likes of which had not been seen in millennia. The Blood Angels were called. Calistarius answered. It would be the last battle he ever fought under that name, and the first steps toward the impossible, Armageddon. A world of fire and steel, its cities choked in smog, its sky the color of ash. It was not a world that sang of glory, nor one that whispered prophecy. It was a forge world, brutal and pragmatic, a place where men lived short, hard lives, shaping weapons for wars they'd never see. And yet it became a crucible. When the greenskin horde descended, the first warning was not a call to arms, but a silence, the quiet death of entire outer settlements, radio signals vanishing mid-broadcast. Then came the static, then the screaming. The orcs came in numbers no voxcaster could quantify. Like rust given motion, they poured from crude landers and ramshackle ships, blanketing the skies in fire and ruin. The second war for Armageddon had begun. The Blood Angels responded with the speed and precision of a blade honed for slaughter. Entire strike forces deployed from orbit, pinpoint teleportations and grav chutes, placing warriors precisely where the Imperium's line buckled. Among the earliest to arrive was Epistolary Calistarius. He did not request command. He was not given a company. Instead, he was embedded within scattered detachments across the southern fronts, where the fighting was thickest. Wherever the orcs threatened to overwhelm, Calistarius appeared, a crimson specter in the storm. But Armageddon was not like the space hulk he had once walked. There were no corridors here, no shadows to peer through or narrow kill zones to exploit. This was war in the open, trenches filled with blood and black oil, manufactorums shattered by artillery, hive towers cracked in two like broken bones. And it was endless. At the heart of the chaos stood Hades' hive, a fortress of industry and desperation, its spires rising like cracked fingers from the poisoned soil. It was here that the orcs pressed hardest, for the hive's defense was a knife in their side. And it was here, amid collapsing infrastructure and mountains of the dead, that Calistarius found the battle that would change everything. He did not arrive with fanfare. One moment, guardsmen were dying on the walls, screaming beneath waves of green flesh and gunfire. The next, a crimson blur leapt into the breach. A wave of psychic force erupted, disintegrating the orc vanguard in a thunderclap of air and splintered stone. He had arrived. Calistarius stood atop the shattered battlements like a wrathful revenant. His psychic presence sent ripples through the warp-tainted battlefield. A flare of light in a sea of madness. He fought with calculated brutality, each kill a message. This line will not break. For weeks, the Librarian moved among the defenders like a ghost of vengeance. He reinforced collapsing choke points, shattered orc machines with blasts of kinetic force, and scorched entire corridors clean with arcs of mind-born flame. His brothers in red admired him. The mortals revered him. Some whispered his name in prayer, but victory never came. The orcs had numbers without end. Every trench they lost, they filled with another mob. Every war boss slain was replaced within minutes by another more brutal than the last. Calistarius, for all his power, was one soul against a flood. Worse still, the flaw stirred. It began as flickers in his vision, a golden gate shattered in the distance, a red-eyed warrior screaming in betrayal, wings spread wide, shrouded in blood. These were not his memories, yet they clung to his mind like parasites. He ignored them. He had to. The chaplains had warned him, in quiet tones not recorded in any codex, that the black rage could come for any of them, even the most disciplined, especially those who thought themselves immune. On the 12th day of the siege, Hades' hive's central power grid collapsed under sustained bombardment. Darkness swept the underhive, and with it came panic. Entire sectors fell silent, no signals, no reinforcements. The blood angels stationed within, including Calistarius, were cut off. Still, they held. What remained of his squad took refuge in the Ecclesiarchy Basilica of the Martyrs Triumphant, an ancient cathedral half buried in ferrocrete and scorched iconography. It was here that the orcs came in force, driven by some foul instinct toward the last flickering stronghold in the underhive. The Blood Angels made their stand. The final transmission from within the basilica, captured by a fleeing servitor, told of a crimson-armored psyker unleashing hell from the pulpit. Bolter fire lit the pews, psychic waves cracked stained glass in patterns of burning wings. Calistarius's mind became a weapon of indiscriminate fury, and then silence. No one expected survivors. In the hours that followed, orbital augurs registered a localized seismic event beneath Hades' hive. It was written off as structural failure, another collapsed support strut in a city that had become a mausoleum. What they did not know was that beneath that shattered cathedral, Calistarius still lived. Broken in body, buried in debris, entombed beneath the bones of friend and foe alike, the Librarian lay dying. His power armor was shattered at the thigh, his chest plate crushed inward. His helm had been torn away in the melee, and blood soaked the flagstones beneath him. And the flaw at last made its move. There, in the suffocating dark, with no breath to scream and no strength to rise, Calistarius saw Sanguinius die, not as a vision, not a metaphor. He felt it. The War Master's claw through the Primarch's chest, the snapping of bones that echoed across eternity, the final gaze of Sanguinius, not filled with hatred but sorrow, and beneath it all the scream, that endless psychic scream that reverberated across the gene seed of every son of Baal. The black rage took him. But something strange happened. where others lost themselves in that moment, becoming little more than frothing berserkers, Calistarius fought back. Not against the enemy, not against the pain, against the vision itself. He refused it. Day blurred into night, hours passed without number. But in that coffin of stone and blood, the librarian did not die. He meditated. He anchored himself to who he had been, to his oaths, to the chapter, to the emperor. In time, the blood in his mouth dried. The madness dulled. He remembered his name, and then he let it go. He pushed aside Calistarius, pushed aside doubt, rage, memory. He embraced only the fire that remained, the core of his being now sharpened by ordeal. And when his eyes opened again, they glowed with the same terrible light that had once danced in Sanguinius's eyes at Terra. He rose, not in triumph, in hunger, in renewal. Bones snapped back into place, wounds sealed, strength returned. He did not crawl from the ruins, he burst from them, a revenant bathed in ash and blood, his soul honed to a blade so sharp even the warp flinched. A warband of orcs scavenging near the wreckage saw movement. They approached, they laughed, they died. The first fell to a punch that crushed its skull. The second was torn in half. The third was burned alive by a glare that sparked with raw psychic fury. By the time the last mob had fled, 30 greenskins lay in pieces, slain by a bare-handed space marine once thought dead. He did not speak. He walked toward the Blood Angel's lines, toward a new name, toward a legend that would shake the Imperium. The warrior that emerged from the ruins of Hades' hive was not Calistarius. He wore the remnants of Calistarius's armor. His rosette was still etched with the markings of the Librarius. But what strode from the wreckage that day, what climbed over the mounds of shattered bone and steel, shoulders straight, gaze distant, was a new entity entirely. And with that emergence came a name, Mephiston. Not a name chosen lightly. It came unbidden, forged in silence during the long hours buried beneath rubble and madness. Mephiston, a title taken from ancient Terran myth, whispered among the librarians, once used to describe a spirit of fury bound in flesh. No one had dared use the name before. Now there was no one else it could belong to. Mephiston walked alone across the corpse-littered streets of Armageddon for 3 days. He did not run. He did not call for extraction. He did not signal distress. He moved with the purpose of a revenant, a spirit returned to complete something left undone. Where he walked, orcs died, but not by bolt gun or blade. They died screaming, their blood vessels rupturing from within. They clutched at their eyes, at their temples, howling as unseen forces tore them apart. Mephiston's psychic power had once been sharp. Now it was monstrous, a roaring storm of potential barely caged behind a mortal skull. He didn't just hear the warp anymore, he commanded it. It was near the charred remains of an old Imperial substation that a trio of Blood Angels patrol scouts first sighted him. They reported seeing a lone figure walking down the center of a destroyed highway, flanked by burning wrecks and orc corpses. Their auspex failed to identify the figure's IFF signature, and for a moment they thought it was some new Xenos warlord, until one of them recognized the remnants of a Blood Angel's pauldron, scorched but intact. They approached with weapons ready. One scout raised his bolt pistol, the other signaled to headquarters. The third, younger, less experienced, asked the figure's name. Mephiston turned his head slowly. He looked the young scout in the eyes. "I am not who I was," he said. "Tell Dante that I have returned." When the Thunderhawk touched down on Baal several weeks later, the chapter assembled in solemn anticipation. Commander Dante himself stood at the landing platform, not in full regalia, but in simple armor, his death mask absent. He had read the initial reports. He had heard the whispers. A battle brother once thought consumed by the Black Rage had not only survived, he had emerged, transformed, and he had not returned feral, raving, or broken. He had returned stronger. As the Thunderhawk's ramp hissed open and the blood-red figure stepped into the sunlight of Baal, the air shifted. Librarians could feel it before they saw him, a psychic gravity that pulled at the edges of thought. Mephiston walked with perfect control, yet every step radiated power. His armor had been reforged in the forge halls of the fleet, bearing new sigils. A skull wreathed in flame, the winged blood drop of Sanguinius upon his chest, and arcane script engraved along his vambraces. Glyphs of protection and dominion, sanctioned by the chapter's chief lexicographers. He did not kneel. He stopped a few paces from Dante, his gaze level. The two stared at one another for a long moment. One a figure of ancient command, the other a mystery wrapped in power. Finally, Dante spoke. Calistarius, the man before him, shook his head once. That name perished beneath Hades' hive. There was no pride in his voice, no arrogance, just truth. Dante inclined his head slightly. Then, "What are you now?" Mephiston answered simply. "Your weapon, if you will have me." The Blood Angel's Librarius is no place for weakness. It is a sanctum of minds forged in flame and shadow, its members shaped by both the discipline of the Codex and the burdens of their psychic gift. Chief Librarian Tigran, a stoic warrior long-serving, had held the post for over a century. When Mephiston returned, Tigran stepped down without argument. There was no ceremony, no vote, no ritual, just a quiet mutual understanding. The Lord of Death had surpassed every standard of psychic might, mental endurance, and spiritual resilience the chapter had ever known. Tigran retired to the meditative sanctum beneath the Arx Angelicum to transcribe his life's visions. Mephiston ascended to the position of chief librarian. The youngest among the librarians whispered that he did not walk. He floated, feet inches above the floor during his meditations, that his blood no longer ran red, but black with bound warp energy, that the red thirst feared him, as if his soul now burned too brightly for the curse to touch. Mephiston said nothing to confirm or deny such tales. He simply worked. His first act was to restructure the Librarius's psychic doctrine, not with heresy, never, but with pragmatism. He had seen what waited beyond the veil. He had lived it. Where previous generations feared proximity to the flaw, Mephiston embraced it, not as corruption but as confrontation. "We do not turn from the fire," he told his students. "We walk into it and shape it to our will." He taught the lexicani to isolate their thoughts with greater precision. He introduced new meditative techniques derived from ancient Terran texts and reinterpreted them with Baalite philosophy. He called for silent duels, mind to mind, as a form of tempering, where psychers would test one another's clarity by trying to unravel defensive wards in controlled mental combat. It was dangerous, exhausting, borderline brutal, but it worked. For the first time in generations, the Librarius produced epistolaries faster than ever before, fewer of them succumbing to warp taint, fewer losing themselves to the Black Rage during psychic overexertion. And through it all, Mephiston remained distant. He did not join the feasts after battle. He did not sing the Hymn of the Wings. He did not participate in the remembrance of the falls. When the chapter gathered to mourn the lost, Mephiston stood apart, present but silent. Some believed he was still fighting something within. Others believed he had become something else entirely, and the rituals of men no longer applied to him. Only one thing was certain. He had become a living embodiment of possibility, terrifying, divine, uncharted. The chaplains kept their distance, but they watched him closely, especially Astartes, the redeemer of the lost. It was his duty to execute those who succumbed to the Black Rage, to grant them the Emperor's mercy when all else failed. And what was Mephiston, if not proof that the Black Rage could be survived? Some chaplains whispered that his very existence undermined their charge, that if he could beat the curse, so could others, if only they were strong enough. Dangerous thinking, heretical even. But Astarath remained silent. For now, Mephiston's time on bail was brief. Barely a year after his return, the call for aid came again. Worlds burning, Xenos threats, the pull of destiny. He left without ceremony, leading squads of battle brothers into the warp's heart, carving psychic scars into the enemies of man. He was not worshipped. The Blood Angels do not worship. But to many he became something other than a battle brother, a figure to invoke in prayer before battle, a silent guardian in the shadows of their minds, a name spoken when the flaw stirred and clarity was slipping. Hold fast. Remember Mephiston. And so the chapter endured. The Librarius strengthened. The curse for a time grew quieter. But within Mephiston's private sanctum, deep beneath the Librarium, a single candle always burned, and above it, engraved in obsidian stone, was a single line written in his own hand. Victory is not purity. It is balance held against the edge of madness. In the years that followed his ascension, Mephiston did not rest. He could not. Something in his soul had changed, not just in form or power, but in direction. Where others saw battlefields, Mephiston saw patterns. Where his brothers fought enemies, he saw echoes, warp fire rippling beneath the surface of reality, as if the galaxy were a drumhead about to tear. The Imperium bled. The great rift had not yet torn open, but the cracks had begun to show. It started with whispers, not voices in his head. Mephiston had long since learned to silence those, but phenomena that danced on the edge of perception, psychic static that followed him like a shadow, occasional bursts of premonition too precise to be coincidence, flickers of unreality behind the eyes of seemingly loyal men. One such man was Magister Hallen, governor of Solon V, a hive world in the Ultima Segmentum. The Blood Angels had no history there, no tithe obligations, no standing deployments. But the Librarius archives held a footnote in a centuries-old astropathic report. Solon V, minor warp anomalies, recatalogue after cleansing. Cleansing. No records of an official purge, no name attached to the footnote. It was the kind of omission that Mephiston noticed, and it was the kind of mystery that would not allow him peace. He requested a strike cruiser and a small force, not a full company, but enough to investigate. Captain Aphiel of the 4th offered men. The chapter librarians advised caution. Mephiston did not consult them again. The Raptor's grasp, a swift and quiet vessel, translated into Solon V's orbit without fanfare. The planet's surface shimmered in the emerald hues of atmosphere-tinted sunlight, its hive spires reaching for the void like the fingers of a drowning man. They received no welcome signal, no challenge code, only silence. Mephiston stood in the command sanctum, eyes closed. His senses reached beyond the hull, past the steel, through the ionosphere. What he found beneath was not peace. It was pressure. The planet pushed against him, as if the world itself did not want to be seen. They descended at night. Drop pods would have been wasteful, too loud, too final. Instead, a Thunderhawk carried Mephiston and a squad of 9 battle brothers down into the shadowed underhive of Hive Joramund, the central spire. They emerged into a city that did not feel dead, but did not feel alive either. There were lights in the windows, smoke from chimneys, power readings, but no people. Not in the streets, not in the airways, not in the Vox. The blood was gone from the veins of the hive, as if something had bled it dry and left the bones upright. Mephiston ordered silence. They moved through the hive like ghosts, servitors tracking motion signatures that vanished when approached. They found factories running with no workers, halls filled with static echoes, cathedrals with sermons recorded in advance, endlessly looping into empty pews. The entire city was a skin worn over something else. Then came the dreams. Not Mephiston's, his brothers. Even the astartes began reporting them, unprompted, ashamed. Dreams of molten towers and rivers of blood that flowed backward. Dreams of faces they'd never seen, whispering names they had never learned. One brother confessed under oath that he awoke with dry tears on his cheeks, and no memory of weeping. Mephiston did not dream. He remembered. In the dead heart of the hive, beneath layers of adamantine and plasteel, they found the throne core, the administrative hub of the planetary government. There were no defenders, just silence. They breached the doors and found what remained of Magister Hallen. He was still in his throne, still dressed in his governor's uniform, still breathing, but his mind was elsewhere. His eyes were wide, staring at something only he could see. His mouth hung open, whispering syllables that changed with each repetition. Mephiston approached and placed 2 fingers on the man's temple. His own mind recoiled. Not from madness, but from something beneath it. A labyrinth. Layers of falsehood built atop something ancient and breathing. And deeper still, the scent of the warp. Not chaos. Not demonic infestation, but the heavy, suffocating silence of hidden power, as if someone or something was burying something in the psychic bedrock of Solon 5. Then the walls began to hum. The event began. Sensors across the hive registered a sudden drop in atmospheric pressure, as if the planet itself had sighed. Light flickered in impossible patterns, shadows cast in reverse, heat without source, angles that bent themselves in wrong directions. And then came the sound, a low, pulsing note, felt more than heard. It rolled through the ground like a heartbeat. Mephiston knew it instantly, not a warp incursion, a summoning. The Lord of Death did not belong to the living, nor did he linger among the dead. Mephiston existed in the strange, uneasy space between, a relic of a soul that had died and something greater or darker that had taken its place. The librarians whispered that he moved like a spirit unbound, and even among the blood angels, where tragedy and honor often walked hand in hand, Mephiston stood apart. In time, it wasn't his powers that drew eyes, but his distance. The blood angels were brothers, more than soldiers, more than warriors, bound by blood, by shared vision, by the flaw they all bore. They meditated together, sang oaths together, fought together, mourned together. But Mephiston observed. When others gathered to share tales of Sanguinius's great deeds, he remained in silence, deep within the librarian's darkest chamber, surrounded by texts few dared to read. When rituals were held beneath the crystal effigies of the angel, Mephiston stood in the back, never absent but never present either. He was there, and yet always somewhere else. Even his breathing seemed quieter than it should have been. He was not shunned. He was revered, admired, feared, in the way mortals fear a thunderstorm or the open void, not out of hate but because they do not understand. And within that reverence, something colder grew. The chaplains noticed it first. Chapel Master Orfeo, the eldest among them, had kept vigil over the blood angel's spiritual health for over 5 centuries. He was stoic, unwavering, the embodiment of measured faith. He did not trust Mephiston. "He has walked too far from the light," he once said to Astartes the Grim, the Redeemer of the Lost. "Not into darkness, something stranger, something without name." Astartes said nothing. He never did when he disagreed, but his silence was a language all its own. Of all the chaplains, Astarath understood the truth best. Mephiston was not corrupted. He was not fallen, but neither was he whole. What stirred behind his crimson eyes was not merely power, nor madness, nor the echoes of the Black Rage. It was something singular, a path not walked by any other son of Sanguinius, and it terrified the chapter's priesthood more than any demon ever could. Even so, Commander Dante protected him. Dante had known Callisterius before the fall, had fought alongside him during the Euryale reclamation and the siege of Vorgantha. He remembered the man's restraint, his insight, the way he never shouted, even in the heat of battle. Mephiston, though altered, bore traces of that same mind, that same presence, and Dante, who had seen 10,000 warriors burn, trusted the rare ones who returned from fire still intact. Let him be, Dante told the other captains during one council of blood. We do not question the mountain for the weight it bears. We only ask if it still stands. But the mountain cast a long shadow. The Librarius itself was changing. Not politically. Mephiston had no interest in council debates or strategic positioning, but culturally. The psykers who trained under him were no longer taught caution as their first virtue. They were taught discipline, yes, rigor, purity, but also ambition. Know the boundaries of your mind, Mephiston told his students, not to remain within them, but so you may test them properly. Some saw this as evolution, others as heresy in its earliest shape. It was epistolary Antros who spoke aloud what others dared only think. He was the youngest epistolary ever elevated, a brilliant mind, intuitive, fiercely loyal. He had studied under Mephiston for 30 years and survived his first 5 deployments with distinction. On the surface, he was the very model of a Blood Angel's librarian, but he was also wary. He approached Mephiston alone in the candlelit sanctum beneath the Hall of Echoes, a place where words hung heavy in the air and the walls remembered things better left forgotten. Master, he said, kneeling, do you believe the Black Rage is a flaw or a crucible? Mephiston's answer came after a long pause. It is both, he said, a test of endurance and an offering. Antros dared to press further. And you? What did it offer you? Mephiston looked down, his face half in shadow. Perspective. Nothing more. Antros never spoke of that conversation again. But after that night, he requested reassignment to a different librarian's tutelage. It was granted, without comment but not without notice. The sanguinary priests, too, had begun to take special interest in Mephiston. They were the caretakers of the gene seed, the keepers of the blood, and they had grown suspicious of what they could not measure. Every astartes has limits. Regenerative capacity, warp saturation thresholds, psychic flux tolerance. Mephiston exceeded all of them, and not just by degrees, by orders of magnitude. His warp signature fluctuated in strange rhythms. At times he appeared as a beacon of blinding psychic light. At others, completely silent, as if he weren't there at all. Apothecary Varus, the most senior of the gene priests, described it best in his private log. Mephiston is stable, physically, mentally, spiritually, undetermined. The flaw no longer whispers in his blood, nor does it sleep. It simply watches. The Blood Angels began to speak of him in 2 distinct tones. In the heat of battle, he was hailed, a hero, an exemplar, the Lord of Death who strode through fire and left nothing but ashes. His presence turned the tide of war. His voice, when raised, silenced fear. Orcs fled from his shadow. Heretics wept before his wrath. Even the psi beasts of the Hadrex anomaly recoiled when he channeled his will. But in the quiet moments, after victory, in the stillness of the Librarian or the tomb's silent crypts of the chapter's dead, they wondered, would Mephiston remain with them forever? Or was he walking a path none of them could follow? Then came the visions, not Mephiston's. Others, battle brothers who had never known warp touch, began waking in the night, screaming. Sanguinary guards who had never faltered in faith began reporting prophetic dreams of Mephiston at the head of an army of flame, his wings no longer golden, but black. Some dreamed of a final war beneath a bleeding sun, where Mephiston stood alone atop a mountain of skulls, eyes hollowed with power, blade dripping with red fire. Each man saw something different, but one thing remained constant. Mephiston stood apart, always apart. When word of this spread, the chapter chaplains once again came before Dante. This time Astartes spoke. "I do not say he is tainted," he admitted, "but we have never walked this far from the angel's path before. And if Mephiston is not falling, then he is forging something new, something we may not survive." Dante looked across the chamber. His golden helm glinted in the candlelight, face unreadable. Finally, he said, "Then we will walk with him, for as long as he walks for us." And with that, the matter was closed, outwardly, but not forgotten. And Mephiston? He knew. He heard their doubts, not through eavesdropping, but through the resonance they left behind. The tension in the warp around him, the way the fortress monastery's very walls seemed to breathe differently when he passed. He did not resent it. He expected it. One night, deep in the subcrypts, Mephiston stood alone before the statue of Sanguinius, the angel's arms stretched wide in mercy and judgment. He placed a single drop of blood upon the altar and said, "If I fall, it will not be as your son. It will be as your reflection." There are places where the warp does not scream, where it does not rage or howl or tear at the veil. There are places where it waits. Mephiston found one of those places beneath the ruined surface of Solon Phi, and there he met the thing that had been waiting for him. The mission had been simple in objective: investigate rising reports of mass hysteria and disappearances on Solon 5, an industrial mining world with no strategic significance. But Mephiston had learned long ago that insignificance was often a mask. The warp did not measure value by supply lines or manufactorum quotas. It was drawn to suffering, and this planet, though forgotten by the stars, bled. The Blood Angel's insertion was surgical. A single Thunderhawk, 3 squads under silence protocols. Mephiston led personally, citing something he would only call a disturbance in the lattice of thought. To most, that meant nothing. To him, it meant a door had opened. The upper hives of Solon 5 were empty. Not devastated, empty. No battle damage, no signs of conflict. Lights still flickered in the hab units. Ovens were left warm, liquids half drunk, as if the population had simply vanished between one breath and the next. The only signs of life were patterns, circles etched into the ferrocrete walkways, symmetrical burn marks near power nodes, chants recorded in the Vox static, looped endlessly beneath the audible spectrum. To the mortal ear, silence. To Mephiston, invitation. He ordered his squads to hold perimeter, and then he descended alone. The access shaft was not in any imperial record. It had been carved beneath the world's original strata, layers older than the Imperium, older than the rise of mankind on Terra. Down there, light ceased to behave properly. Vox signals stretched, warped, or folded in on themselves. Mephiston's helmet display flickered with red runes, then went dark altogether. He discarded it. Armor weighed heavily in that place, as if gravity remembered more than it should. The tunnel ended in a cavern of crystal, not natural formation, shaped deliberately. Thousands of crystalline spires formed an inverted dome around a singular, flawless obelisk of mirrored glass. The surface reflected nothing. It absorbed the image of whoever looked into it, trapping it inside like a stillborn thought. Mephiston stepped forward and his reflection vanished. In its place he saw Makar, not as he had once been, not as the traitor-psyker of Kalth, nor the howling monster of the screaming vortex, but as an ideal, perfect, serene, a figure of impossible symmetry and molten eyes. The demon prince did not rise in fury. He did not strike. He spoke, calm, measured. "I've been watching you, blood angel." Mephiston did not answer. He prepared a psychic shield, flexed his mind like a sword, but no attack came. "I watched you claw your way from madness. I saw you remake yourself with blood and fire. You impressed me." Mephiston narrowed his eyes. Makar smiled. "You're angry. You think I'm flattering you. But I'm not." Still, Mephiston said nothing. In his silence was more strength than most armies. "You are more than a man," Makar continued. "More than a gene-forged zealot. You are what your Primarch could have become had he not shackled himself to sentiment and sorrow." That voice, it was like silver cutting through velvet. It lured and needled. It offered clarity. Your kind wears grief like armor. You mourn Sanguinius in every breath, and it has made you weak. But you, Mephiston, you have tasted freedom. And here Makar stepped forward, from the glass, from the mirror, from nothing. He materialized not with a roar but a whisper, tall, cloaked in shifting robes of screaming runes. His face changed with every blink, sometimes Mephiston's own, sometimes Sanguinius's, sometimes something else entirely. "I can offer you a truth your brothers will never know," the demon said. "A liberation from the chains of fear. No more flaw, no more curse, no more pretending to be what you're not." Mephiston drew Vitaris, his force sword humming with restrained hatred. "You mistake transformation for corruption," he said, his voice flat. "And you mistake my silence for hesitation." The demon tilted its head. "Do I?" A beat of stillness, then the cavern collapsed into warp fire. The psychic duel that followed could not be seen with mortal eyes. There were no bolts, no gunfire, no arcane sigils drawn in chalk. It was a war of wills, a clashing of thought-forged blades honed by thousands of years of experience and madness. Makar struck first. A nightmare of entropic force aimed at the core of Mephiston's mind, intending to unravel his sense of self. But Mephiston was not a mortal psyker. He was a fortress. He absorbed the attack like a stone absorbs wind. He did not counter, not at first. He waited. Let Makar expend himself. Let him believe he held the upper hand. Then Mephiston struck back. He flung open the doors of his memory. Not to attack, to reveal. He showed Makar the moment of his rebirth. The 7 days beneath Armageddon's ruins. The moment the flaw screamed, and he screamed louder. The moment he became Mephiston, not by gift, not by curse, but by choice. Makar flinched. A millisecond was enough. Vitaris struck, cleaving psychic flesh. Makar staggered, roaring now, the calm mask shattered. "You are a fool. You fight for carrion gods. You kneel before a corpse." Mephiston advanced. Better a corpse than a liar. He drove the blade home. There was no explosion, no firestorm, just the sound of glass shattering. The obelisk cracked from within. Light poured out, not golden, not warp-tainted. White. It consumed the cavern. It consumed Makar. It consumed Mephiston. And then, silence. Mephiston awoke, kneeling in the ruins of the crystal vault. No demon, no obelisk, just ash. His armor was scorched, his mind bruised, but he remained. He stood, walked slowly toward the surface. As he ascended, something within him felt heavier, not in burden, but in weight. A new density, a new gravity. The echo of the duel remained inside him like a second heartbeat. He had not merely resisted Makar, he had learned from him, not his philosophy, not his promises, but his weakness, pride disguised as clarity, freedom offered without price, and the assumption, the fatal assumption, that Mephiston wanted to be saved. When he returned to the surface, his brothers stood in stunned silence. The psychic storm had ended the moment the obelisk cracked. Solon 5 was calm again, the madness gone. No one asked what he had faced. They knew better. But one young battle brother, barely more than a neophyte, dared to speak. Was it a demon, my lord? Mephiston looked at the boy, and for a moment his face was unreadable. Then he said, "No, it was a mirror," and he walked past them, crimson cloak trailing ash and starlight behind him. The first indication that something was wrong with Holonen came in the form of a prayer. It arrived as a garbled astropathic transmission, a fractured litany half-chanted, half-screamed, intercepted by a relay station orbiting Vanium's crown. The message bore no coordinates, no seal of authentication, only a name repeated between verses: the Lord of Death. At first, the Mechanicus dismissed it as a misrouted devotional. Holonen was a compliant world, a loyal cog in the Imperium's great machine. Its hive cities produced promethium and processed ceramite. Its nobles bowed before the Emperor's name. Its populace was statistically docile, genetically stable. But when the signal was repeated again 2 days later, this time clearer, more insistent, it drew attention from Commander Dante himself. Within a week, a strike force was mobilized. Mephiston led it. Not because he had asked, he rarely did, but because the chapter's Librarius had calculated a rising psychic echo centered on the planet's crust, one that pulsed irregularly, as though mimicking a heartbeat from within the Earth. When Mephiston saw the pattern, he understood. This was no mere anomaly. It was a summons. Holonen, upon arrival, did not look like a world in crisis. Orbit was quiet. No distress beacons, no fleet debris, no mass evacuations. The planet turned calmly on its axis, its oceans a rust-brown hue, its cities gleaming beneath the glow of an artificial sunshade designed to mitigate surface radiation. But the readings were wrong. Too quiet, too regular, like a body whose pulse had been stilled with drugs. Mephiston felt the silence the moment the Crimson Resolve broke atmosphere. His fellow Blood Angels, 2 squads from the 2nd Company and a unit of Sanguinary Guard, noted nothing amiss. But he did. He smelled it in the warp, a taste of old blood and new spores. They landed in Hive Stratos, the capital and largest of the Hive cities. What they found was function. Trains still ran. Security turrets remained active. Automated traffic passed in obedience cycles. But the people, the human element, were gone. Not dead, not hiding. Gone. A full population of 20 million had seemingly evaporated. The only signs of life came in recorded messages. Pre-programmed voice loops echoed through public address systems, each one calling for calm, for faith, for compliance. They repeated on hour intervals. The words were hollow, the tones wrong. Mephiston walked the halls of the upper hive like a man moving through a mausoleum built for the living. Every empty apartment felt too empty, the kind of absence not caused by sudden violence, but by invitation, like doors left open on purpose. It was beneath the surface, far beneath, that the answers began to take shape. The lower hives had collapsed inward days before the strike force's arrival. No seismic activity registered, no bombing, just sudden, inexplicable ruin. The Blood Angels descended into the shattered levels accompanied by a detachment of Holonen's last functioning servitor drones. The machines had been offline when they arrived, but reactivated as soon as Mephiston entered the proximity of the hive core. No cause was given. They simply moved, as though drawn to him. The path they traced led deep beneath the Promethium refineries and abandoned HAB units, down into forbidden maintenance tunnels and forgotten cisterns, where the walls pulsed with condensation and biological residue. There, Mephiston heard the first true sound of the enemy, breathing, not from lungs, from the hive itself. A slow, rhythmic inhale and exhale that seemed to come from the stone. The servitors collapsed shortly after. The Genestealer cult had not grown in the way such infestations normally did. There were no riots, no open rebellion, no mobs waving iconography of the four-armed emperor. The cult here had moved silently, spreading through water supplies and mental suggestion. Entire blocks had converted overnight without even realizing it. By the time Imperial authorities noticed, their hands were already part of the hive mind. The cult had burrowed, but this was no ordinary uprising. At its center was something Mephiston had never seen. Not in 10,000 years of battle. A warrior-psyker node, a living organic shrine woven from the bodies of converted psykers and crowned with a massive tendril of alien flesh that reached upward, spiraling like a horn. It pulsed with psychic energy. Not in wild chaos, but in deliberate pattern, the same psychic signal that had echoed through the Librarian weeks earlier. Mephiston stepped before it, alone, and looked into the eye of the thing. It opened. Not a mouth, not a warp portal. An eye, massive, slit-pupiled, glowing with knowledge stolen from thousands of dreams. And in that gaze, Mephiston saw the truth. This was no accident, no mutated spawn. It was a beacon, a psychic flare designed not to draw demons, but to call Hive Fleet Kraken. At the same moment Mephiston registered this revelation, the skies of Holonin turned black. Tyrannid spores rained down. The bioships had arrived, and the war began. What followed was siege without end. Mephiston rallied the remaining defenders into concentric redoubts deep within the ruins of Hive Stratos. He coordinated overlapping kill zones, redirected fusion cells to power defensive turrets, and personally slaughtered the first waves of Hormagaunts with blasts of withering telekinetic force. But the swarm was unrelenting. Carnifexes broke through bulkheads like paper. Lictors stalked the shadows, taking scouts in silence. Hive Guard pounded the outer bastions with living artillery. Mephiston held the command node himself. For 12 days he did not sleep. He absorbed information through data links and direct psychic interface. His mind became a fortress, not just against the Tyranids, but against fear. And yet, even as he fought, he knew this was not a battle he could win. The Tyranids were not here to conquer Holonin. They were here to consume it. On the 13th day, the Genestealer Patriarch emerged. It tore through the Underhive like a comet, psychic shrieks disabling entire squads before they saw it. It was massive, bloated from feeding on countless minds, its claws fused with neurocyst growths that lashed out like whips. Mephiston met it beneath the collapsed chapel of the Emperor's Repose. There, in a chamber once sacred, now soaked with acid and ichor, the Lord of Death confronted the King of the Worms. The battle was not elegant. Vitaris clashed with chitin. Psychic bursts lit the darkness in jagged strobe. The Patriarch's will slammed against Mephiston's mind with alien fury. Not words, but instinct. A hunger so pure it bypassed language altogether. It was the need to consume, the desire to end difference, to end thought, to fold all things into the one mind. But Mephiston, even in silence, did not bend. He drove Vitaris into the Patriarch's spine and severed its hive link. The backlash shredded 3 levels of the hive. Mephiston was buried in the collapse. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was not death, but the stars. He saw them burning above the ruined ceiling of the chapel and felt the Tyranid ships still falling, still hungry, still coming. He awoke surrounded by rubble. He could not feel his legs, but he could feel something else. Hope. Because in the void above, new warp signatures bloomed like firecrackers. Drop pods, transports, reinforcements, the Angel's Vermilion, the Carmine Blades, the Flesh-Tearers. His brothers had come, and somewhere among them a voice rang out, "We answer the call of the Lord of Death." Mephiston had never led a crusade. He had led assaults, commanded strike forces, even stood as the central pillar of psychic resistance on worlds facing annihilation. But this was different. Kryptis was not just a war zone, it was a warning. When the first data stream arrived from the Ordo Xenos, it was fragmented. Satellite feed loss, atmospheric interference, vox chatter drowned in static. But there were enough fragments to trace the shape of the threat. Tyranids, again, not a splinter, not a scouting claw, but a tide, a vanguard of Hive Fleet Leviathan. And it wasn't just one world, it was an entire system, collapsing in coordinated silence. The Kryptis Shield, an Imperial defensive line of outposts, void pickets, and orbital batteries, had failed without firing a shot. Each bastion consumed or bypassed as if the Xenos had foreknowledge of its design. Mephiston read the reports alongside Commander Dante and the War Council aboard the Angel's Wrath. The conclusions were obvious. This wasn't conquest, it was prelude. Kryptis was the last obstacle before the Baal system, home of the Blood Angels. If it fell, so would the chapter. Mephiston was given strategic command of the Librarius component of the Kryptis response, not just the Blood Angels' own psykers, but those from the Angels' Anchor Mine, Flesh Tearers, Blood Drinkers, and other successor chapters who had answered the call. It was the largest mobilization of psychic might the Sons of Sanguinius had attempted in 10,000 years, and no one knew if it would be enough. The fleet divided upon arrival. Dante, ever the tactician, led the main force to Phodia, the outermost planet, a once verdant agri-world now overrun with Tyranid bioconstructs and aerial swarms. Mephiston requested insertion into the most volatile theater, Alecto, a volcanic moon of Phodia, covered in sulfur storms and seismic fractures. Why? Because the warp screamed there, louder than anywhere else. The descent into Alecto was not a battle. It was an ordeal. Storms ripped apart drop pods mid-descent. Gravity fluxes altered trajectory. Bioacid rain boiled armor. The first 6 squads to touch ground lost Vox contact within minutes. Mephiston landed alone. Not by design, the rest of his unit was scattered. Some died on impact, others simply vanished. He emerged from his pod into a sky of churning gold and black. The landscape writhed beneath him, the very ground pulsing like organic matter. Mountains bled, rivers flowed with ammonia, trees screamed. This world had already changed, warp-tainted, not corrupted by chaos, but bent by sheer biological purpose. The hive mind had reshaped reality here, not as a side effect, but as a weapon, and Mephiston had walked into its center. He moved for 2 days without rest, without food, navigating by instinct more than map. He followed the echoes in the warp, not clear signals, but distortions, hollows in the psychic field that suggested something vast, moving unseen beneath the crust. On the 3rd day, he found it. A synapse spire, not grown like other Tyranid hives, but built as if the swarm had begun, mimicking imperial structures. It rose from a caldera's heart, encased in chitin and steel, and it radiated thought like a lighthouse of the damned. From here, the hive mind pulsed commands across Alecto, and here, Mephiston made a choice. He would not destroy it. He would listen. He approached the spire in meditation. Vitaris sheathed, armor powered low, not cloaked but open, not attacking but inviting. And it responded. Tendrils unfurled from the spire's base, not to strike but to encircle. They did not touch him. They hovered, quivering, curious. For a moment, Mephiston felt what it felt. The hunger, the unity, the unbearable pressure of a billion minds focusing on a single thought. He is not prey. He is not kin. He is anomaly. Then a question formed, not in words, but in concept. Join? Mephiston's mind flared with defiance, not fear, refusal. He reached out with his own psychic will, not to answer, but to show. He cast the image of Baal into the void, of Sanguinius's statue in the Hall of Remembrance, of the Red Grail, of a brotherhood tempered by sacrifice. The hive mind recoiled, not from ideology, from difference. Unity could not tolerate division. And Mephiston, in that moment, became something worse than an enemy. He became a disruption. The synapse spire shrieked. Bio-alarms howled across the moon. Tunnels burst open. Morlocks surfaced. The crust cracked like ice. And Mephiston, calm, centered, now certain, drew his blade. He had not come to destroy the spire. He had come to become the weapon it could not predict. What followed was not a duel, nor a battle, nor even a war. It was containment. Mephiston channeled everything he had learned. From Armageddon, from Solon Fife, from the dreams of Sanguinius himself, and became stillness. While the rest of the Cryptus system burned, he held Alecto's psychic core alone. For 6 days, the planet threw everything at him. Trigons, broodlords, bioplasmic artillery, even weather altered to target his genetic signature. He did not retreat. He did not call for aid. He did not fall. On the 7th day, the synapse spire imploded. Not from his blade, but from psychic dissonance. His mere presence, his unassimilated, divergent will, had become an infection within the hive mind's control lattice. Alecto went dark. Elsewhere in the system, Dante's forces routed the swarm from Phodia. The orbital mines on Neogeddon were reactivated. The angels in Carmine stabilized Throxus. The Tyrannid advance was slowed, but no one understood why. Not until Mephiston walked back into the angel's wrath, bloodied but unbroken, and said simply, "It can be resisted." He collapsed shortly after, spent, but not broken. The Librarius logged the Cryptus campaign as a victory, strategic if not complete. But within the sacred records, Mephiston added a single entry in his own hand. The hive learns. We must learn faster, or we will become prey that remembers nothing. And beneath it, the strange part, it saw me, and still it doubted. Let it doubt no longer, for in Alecto's burning silence, the Tyrannids learned something they had never before encountered, not just resistance, not just will, but a mind outside their cycle, a mind that would not be consumed. They came like a tide of teeth, not as a horde, but as a cosmic certainty, the crawling doom of Hive Fleet Leviathan, moving not with hunger, but inevitability. The stars over Baal dimmed before the first bioship entered the system. At the edge of the Baal expanse, 1,000 worlds had already gone dark, their defenses stripped, their atmospheres peeled like fruit. The Cryptus system had held, barely. But Mephiston knew that had not been a victory. It had been a delay, and now there was no more delaying. The Blood Angels stood alone on the brink of their own extinction. Baal was no stranger to death. Its twin moons, Baal Prime and Baal Secundus, had borne the scars of radiation and civil collapse for millennia. It was from these poisoned wastelands that the sons of Sanguinius were drawn, purified in gene seed, elevated in might, shaped by war. But even the harsh landscape of Baal had never seen this. From orbit, Mephiston could see the swarm as it arrived, not as distinct ships, but as a blanket of shadow across the void. The bioships resembled living comets, their organic hulls bristling with spore shoots and digestive feelers. The hive tendrils stretched across the entire sector like webs spun by a god-sized predator. Leviathan wasn't simply coming to feed, it was coming to erase. Commander Dante called every Blood Angel home. Every successor chapter, every shattered fragment of the old legion, from the angels in carmine to the flesh-tearers, the lamenters to the knights of blood. They answered. They came not as a legion, but as a funeral procession prepared to bury themselves with honor. And Mephiston stood at the center. The Lord of Death, Chief Librarian, the one who had returned from the Black Rage itself. He was not just a weapon now, he was a symbol. In the final days before the storm, the fortress monastery atop the Arx Angelicum rang with the echo of ancient rites. Blood rituals were performed beneath the statues of Sanguinius, litanies sung into the dusk winds, weapons anointed with oils blessed by the sanguinary priests. Yet Mephiston did not attend the final rites. He walked instead through the Vault of Echoes alone. This was the chamber where every Blood Angel had, at some point, knelt in silence, a room not for war, but for reflection. The walls were lined with data slates, relics, bone fragments. There was no noise save for the soft pulse of environmental regulation. Mephiston placed a single candle before the name of Calistarius. He said nothing, and then he left. When the first mycetic spore struck Baal Prime, the planet screamed. Not in atmosphere or tremor, in the warp. The Black Rage, which had always slumbered in the blood of the chapter, surged like a dam breaking. Entire companies collapsed mid-prayer, seized by ancestral memory. Battle brothers tore at their own faces, speaking in the voice of the angel, screaming Horus's name. The death companies swelled. So many fell to it that entire squads were reassigned in hours. Even seasoned veterans, warriors of 100 campaigns, suddenly found themselves donning black. They were no longer brothers. They were vessels of a single moment, the last breath of Sanguinius at the Eternity Gate. And Mephiston felt every one of them. The Librarius did all it could. Psykers formed circles in the crucible dome, focusing their will to calm the bloodlust rippling through the ranks. Some succeeded, some bled from the eyes and were carried away in silence. And still the swarm fell. When Leviathan breached low orbit, the sky over Baal turned a color not found in nature, a deep, suffocating violet tinged with red. The bioships began to release their payloads, millions of organisms in endless variety, screamer killers, harridans, molochs, warriors, rippers, swarms of winged gargoyles that blackened the sun. From orbit to soil, the swarm fell like a divine judgment. The Blood Angels met them head-on. At the craters of Anthrax, the flesh-tearers dug in. At the sulfur spine, the Angels Vermilion fought atop spewing lava vents. At the Red Scar Pass, the Blood Angels' second company held the line for 18 hours against a Carnifex stampede until air support arrived. And in the burning skies above Baal Prime, Mephiston descended. Not as a commander, not as a leader, as a counterweight to the apocalypse. He fell from orbit like a meteor, carried in a custom drop capsule inscribed with protective runes and wrapped in copper wire inscribed with 100 psalms. He landed where the warp screaming was loudest. The ruins of Sepulchre Alpha, once a training cathedral, now buried beneath tyrannid biomass. What he found there would have broken a mortal mind. Hive creatures the size of fortresses, tendrils fusing with stone, flesh pylons growing from the bones of chapels, adorned with the icons of the four-armed false emperor. The genetic prophecy made real. A hybrid infestation had bloomed. The Genestealer cult had not died with the first wave. They had waited, and now they were guiding Leviathan's will. Mephiston walked through the battlefield like a spirit of fire. Lightning leapt from his outstretched hands, carving paths through broods. Warp energy rippled around him, bending the laws of space. He fought not with raw rage, but with the precision of a master, every movement part of a psychic equation too vast to comprehend. A hive tyrant descended upon him. It lasted 12 seconds, but even he could not be everywhere. By the second week of the invasion, Baal Secundus was overrun. The moon's bastions were buried under biomass. Its defenders, the 10th Company, made a final stand in the wastes of Vordak and were never seen again. Worse still, the swarm began to adapt. Warp-dampening organisms emerged. Psychic null auras intensified. It became harder and harder for Mephiston to extend his awareness. Even he felt doubt, not fear, not weakness, just the cold recognition of limits. And then came the impossible. As the battle reached its peak, with the fortress monastery under siege and sanguinary guard falling from the sky like broken angels, a warp storm tore open above Baal. But it was not a demonic incursion. It was deliverance. From the rift stepped Robout Guilliman, returned Primarch of the Ultramarines, leading the Indomitus Crusade. Fleet after fleet followed, the full force of the reborn Imperium. The Tyranids, sensing something beyond even their vast consciousness, began to retreat. Not in fear, but recalculation. The tide turned. Baal was not saved, but it survived. In the aftermath, Mephiston stood upon the parapets of the Arx Angelicum. The fortress was in ruins. The sarcophagi of the honored dead had been cracked open, their bones scattered. The blood chalice was gone. Statues of Sanguinius lay in rubble, but the chapter endured. He stared out over the burning sands, watching as servitors cleared the bodies of tyrannid beasts taller than war machines. Astarath joined him. For a long time, neither spoke. Then the High Chaplain asked, "Was it worth the cost?" Mephiston replied without turning, "It was not a cost. It was a warning." Astarath frowned. "A warning to whom?" Mephiston finally looked at him. "To the enemy," he said, "that we are not yet finished, that the angel's legacy still has teeth." And in the distance, deep beneath the sand, something moved, a tendril not yet dead, a remnant of the swarm that had tasted something it could not consume, a mind it could not understand, a voice it could not silence. The Lord of Death had stood at the end of the world and remained. He had not dreamed since Armageddon, not as men understand dreaming. Sleep, for Mephiston, had become a formality, a gesture toward mortality. His mind never quieted. His thoughts flickered behind closed eyes like caged lightning, always watching, always calculating. But on the 33rd night after the devastation of Baal, he dreamed. And in the dream, he bled. It began in the Sanctum Oculus, deep beneath the Librarian, a place few knew existed. Its walls were lined with the neural cores of fallen psykers, their final thoughts captured and stored like data. The silence there was never complete. The air vibrated faintly with remembered voices, warnings, confessions, madness. It was here Mephiston performed the rite of resonance, an archaic psychic self-examination once practiced by the Legion's earliest librarians, now all but forgotten. He had not performed it in centuries, but something stirred beneath his skin, like fire through marrow, and he knew the black rage had returned. Not in its old form, not as a wave of memory or red ruin. It came not howling but speaking. It whispered in a tongue without grammar. Not speech, but resonance, meaning projected directly into thought. He sat in the ritual circle, surrounded by braziers, incense curling through the air in slow spirals. Blood taken from his own veins marked runes around him, glyphs for clarity, endurance, and denial. His body stilled, his mind opened, and he descended. The first layer was memory. He stood on the deck of the Angel's Wrath, watching as Baal burned. He turned and saw not his own reflection in the plasteel wall, but Calistarius's face, screaming silently, mouth frozen mid-command. He moved again. The scene twisted. Now Armageddon. The rubble above him still trembling. He reached out. The rock split apart like bone. But instead of crawling into air, he emerged into flame. The fire had no source, no heat, only color, red, gold, and black. He stepped forward, and the flames gave way to a mirror, a perfect circle. He looked inside and saw Mephiston staring back, but not him. This Mephiston was crowned in horns of obsidian. His eyes were orbs of void light. 1,000 screams coiled behind his gaze. His armor was the same, but wrong subtly. The aquila was twisted. The blood drop burned sideways. He raised one hand and spoke. "You think you are free. You believe you won. You did not emerge. You were chosen." Mephiston tried to deny him, but in this place denial had no voice, only vision. Suddenly he stood in the hall of sanguinary reflection, back on Baal, surrounded by angelic statues. The blood of his brothers painted the floor. He saw Astartes kneeling before a corpse, whispering prayers. He saw Dante speaking to someone unseen, his voice filled with a weight that bent even him. And then he saw a name, carved in gold. Not Sanguinius, not Calistarius, but Mephiston, etched into the marble as if it had always been there. A tombstone. And beneath it, a single word, aberration. Pain surged through him. Not physical, existential. A tearing of self, like a soul being retranslated. Suddenly he was on Terra. Not the Terra of the present, but the throne world as it was, burning, weeping, screaming. He stood amid the ruins of the palace during the siege, shoulder to shoulder with warriors long dead. And yet, he was alone. None saw him. None knew him. He walked the steps of the Eternity Gate, alone, as Horus's laughter echoed from the orbit above. And there, at the peak, he found Sanguinius, dead, still, beautiful. The Primarch opened his eyes and said, "You are not my son." Mephiston fell. He awoke not in the circle, but somewhere beneath it, a metaphysical depth few had ever explored. This was no longer memory. This was the deep warp, the reflection of the soul, where every psychic scar manifests. He was not alone. Around him danced phantoms, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, all clad in red. All his face. Some bore the eyes of Calistarius, others the fangs of fallen Death Company brothers. One version held a blade dripping with ichor, another wore black, not red, and wept as he killed. They circled him. They spoke together in unison. "What are you, Mephiston? A survival? A perversion? A prophecy?" He screamed to silence them, and they fell still. But one remained. He stepped forward. His armor bore no heraldry, no chapter badge, only a white skull on a crimson field. He knelt and offered Mephiston a chalice. Within, black blood. "Drink," he said, "and see." Mephiston did, and for the first time in 1,000 years he saw the truth. Not of the black rage, not of his transformation, but of the source. He saw the gene seed, not as DNA, not as data, but as a living song, a melody written by Sanguinius, reshaped by the Emperor, twisted by death and resurrection and mourning. He saw the point, the exact moment where that song fractured. It was not during the siege, not at Cygnus, but before, in a room of gold and silence where Sanguinius wept alone. And in that tear was the first note of the curse. Mephiston understood then. He had not overcome the black rage. He had inverted it. Where others drowned in sorrow, he had consumed it, taken it into himself and reshaped it as strength. But it had never left. It had only bowed. He awoke screaming. The braziers were cold, the runes broken. He was bleeding from the nose and ears, but alive, whole, changed, not in power, but in knowledge, and that was more dangerous than any mutation. Later, as he stood beneath the Arx Angelicum's twilight dome, a junior librarian approached him, sensing something had shifted. "Lord Mephiston," the boy said, eyes wide, "did you see something?" Mephiston did not answer immediately. He looked towards the stars. "Not something," he said. "Everything." And beneath his feet, in the vaults of Baal, the statues of the angel trembled faintly. Not from quake, not from pressure, but from a name that now resonated across the psychic sea. Mephiston, a name the warp now recognized, not as a man, not as a soul, but as a singularity. His name reached Draconith before he did. A world of ice and steel, high in the galactic north, Draconith had once been a fortress of the Mechanicus. Now, it was a war zone, overrun by corrupted Skitarii legions, their minds subverted by a sentient scrap code anomaly of unknown origin. The Adeptus Mechanicus had requested aid, not because they could not hold, but because they feared what they might become. They asked for precision. They asked for silence. Instead, they got Mephiston. When the Thunderhawk pierced the upper atmosphere, the Mechanicus Magi watched its descent with clinical curiosity until the augurs detected the psychic flare bleeding from the hull like sunfire through smoke. The onboard emissions should have killed every tech priest within range, but none dared speak against it, because the name on the manifest had frozen every binary tongue. Chief Librarian Mephiston of the Blood Angels, Lord of Death, Slayer of the Patriarch, the Unfallen, even to the machine cult for whom superstition was algorithm and worship was logic. That name carried weight, not numerical, not measurable, just inevitable. To the Skitarii still loyal, he was a myth made metal. To those corrupted by the machine madness spreading through the hive spires, he was something else, a signal they could not intercept, a variable they could not compute, a mind not bound to their data chain, and that made him an error. He emerged from the Thunderhawk in silence, garbed not in his ceremonial cloak, but in simplified combat armor, marked only by the seal of the Librarius and the crimson skull of his office. The tech priests bowed, not as one does to a superior, but as one does before a malfunctioning relic that still glows with light. They offered him tactical reports. He burned them. "We do not need maps of decay," he said, "only the direction of the rot's heart." And with that he advanced into the frost-scoured city of Aetherus Magna, flanked by 2 squads of blood angels, each silent, each following him as if they followed a living gravity. In the data logs of Magos Vertan Axi, there is a notation made after Mephiston passed through the central gate. Presence unstable, atmospheric ions at 400% variance, lesser tech adepts reporting auditory hallucinations. Recommend full memory purge after campaign. Subject Mephiston is not compatible with empirical record-keeping. The corrupted Mechanicus forces had turned Aetherus Magna into a living forge. Black smoke fed into the skies from chimneys now shaped like vox horns. The scrap code infected more than machines. It rewrote intent. Servitors were building structures they didn't understand. Buildings were growing into shapes that violated geometry, and at the center of it all was a spire of pure signal, a tower broadcasting psychic dissonance into the void, summoning something. Mephiston did not wait for full deployment. He entered alone. To the corrupted ones, his arrival was a virus. Their weapons misfired. Targeting arrays refused to lock. Some began attacking each other, whispering madly that their visions were being overwritten by a red thread through the machine. One Skitarii Alpha fired on Mephiston with a triple-linked neutron beam. It passed through him like mist. The corrupted machine man froze. Mephiston placed his hand on the Alpha's face and whispered something in a language that made the Mechanicus adepts scream just hearing it across shared vox. The Alpha detonated, not in flame, in silence. By the time the Blood Angels arrived behind him, the enemy had begun to retreat from themselves. They fled from reflections. They opened fire on audio signals. They began broadcasting distress in binary wails, begging for machine spirits to intervene. But even the machine spirits had gone silent, because Mephiston's presence bent the psychic weight of the city. A young battle brother named Raphael, newly assigned to Mephiston's honor guard, wrote in his final log, "He walks like he's already seen the ending, like he's memorized the last page of the book, and everything else is just rehearsal." I don't think we're here to kill the enemy. I think we're here to witness what happens when Mephiston decides something should end. They reached the signal tower after 3 hours of close quarters fighting. The spire loomed above them, not built, grown, its data flesh pulsing with light. Inside a consciousness, not demonic, not Xenos. Something born of pure computation twisted by desire. It tried to speak through the vox. "Blood Angel, you are incorrect code. Your presence contaminates the logic chain. Redact yourself." Mephiston looked upward and answered, "I am the rejection your machine never calculated." Then he reached out, not with hands, but with thought. The tower collapsed, not in fire, not in impact, but in identity failure. The signal spire ceased to believe it existed. The broadcast became contradiction, and the rot began to unwrite itself. The war ended before dawn. The corrupted Skitarii deactivated. The scrap code unraveled. The survivors wept, some in awe, others in the absence of thought, and Mephiston walked from the ruin unsmiling. He had not exulted in the victory. To him it had been a demonstration, not of power, but of precision. After the campaign, tech priest Dominus Telkar of Forge Phaeton requested a formal audience. He wished to analyze Mephiston's presence for future contingencies. The chief librarian declined. "I am not a constant," he said, "and you should not ask a flame to explain why it burns." Telkar persisted. Mephiston offered only one more line. "Try to record me again, and I will show you how far your gods can forget." No more questions were asked. In the months following the Draconith cleansing, strange messages began to appear in Mechanicus network caches. Not instructions, not viruses, just 4 words: "He walks in red." And wherever those words appeared, tech priests experienced temporary signal loss, followed by elevated heartbeat rates and ocular displacement. In time, the phrase was officially classified as a repeating anomaly vector and quarantined. Unofficially, it became a prayer, a warning whispered through transmission codes, and the Magi of Forge Worlds began to agree on one thing. If the Lord of Death comes, do not scan him, do not speak to him, just record his footsteps, and hope he keeps walking. They summoned him to Terra in silence. No proclamation, no heraldry, no banners unfurled, just a coded transmission sealed with the hexagrammaton cipher of the Ordo Hereticus, its meaning clear in 6 syllables: "Attend or be declared abominable." For lesser warriors, such a summons would be met with dread. For Mephiston, it was met with quiet calculation, not surprise, not defiance, only timing. He left Bale with neither escort nor explanation. Dante did not ask why. The chapter master simply watched the Thunderhawk rise through Baal's crimson dusk, a brief comet against the cursed sands, and wondered whether Mephiston would ever return, or if what returned would still bear his name. The journey to Terra took 3 weeks, 3 weeks of sealed silence, no contact, no navigation control, no stars, just a black box suspended in warp isolation. When Mephiston emerged from the stasis tomb aboard the Vigilant Precept, he found his armor untouched, his weapons returned, and 3 adepts of the Ordo Hereticus standing before him in robes too clean for any honest man. The tallest of them, Inquisitor Vos Illyrian, nodded slightly. "Welcome to Terra," he said. "It does not feel like welcome," Mephiston replied. "That is because you are not here as a guest." They brought him not to the Imperial Palace, not to the hallowed halls where the Primarch now walked and the Emperor sat in silence, but to the Sanctic Judicarium, a tribunal fortress carved into the mountain bones beneath the Himalasian range, a place of cold air and colder decisions. Mephiston descended into its stone arteries like a relic being returned to its box. He made no protest, but the stone remembered his steps. The Judicarium was not a court in any mortal sense. There was no jury, no defense, only the eyes. 3 inquisitors, cloaked in shadow and silence, seated behind a barrier of reinforced null glass. Their identities were hidden, even their voices digitally modulated, to ensure no psychic familiarity could be formed. The purpose was not fairness. The purpose was control. The chamber was lit by a single beam from above. Mephiston stood within it, arms free, posture regal. He did not blink. He did not breathe heavily. He did not pray. "State your designation," said the center voice. "Mephiston," he replied, "Chief Librarian of the Blood Angels, wielder of Vitaris, formerly known as Calistarius. Are you aware of why you have been brought here? I am aware that your kind fears what it cannot name." The pause was long, but the questioning continued. They began with the Black Rage. "Are you, or are you not, subject to the same psychic flaw as your brothers?" "No," Mephiston replied. "I have overcome it." "That is not possible." "It was not." More silence. Then, "Do you possess memories from before your transformation?" "All of them. Even the moment of Sanguinius's death? I remember it as clearly as I remember my own." "You are aware that memory is a vector for contagion?" "Yes. And yet you do not submit to containment?" "I contain myself." They moved to the soul. "Do you believe yourself to still be Astartes?" "I believe myself to be Mephiston." "That is not an answer. It is the only one I offer." "Do you believe you possess a soul?" "I believe the warp thinks I do." "Do you know what lies beyond death?" "I walked through it. I did not linger." Then they asked the question no one else dared ask. "Are you still loyal to the Imperium?" Mephiston raised his eyes. Not in anger, in understanding. "Your kind believes loyalty means obedience," he said. "Mine was forged in blood and silence. Not at your command, not beneath your watch. So you refuse to answer." "I already did." Inquisitor Illyrian was not among the judges, but he watched from behind a double-sealed observation chamber, joined by 2 others, Cardinal Executor Varsus of the Ministorum and Epistolary Droll of the Grey Knights. None of them spoke for a time, until Varsus, voice rich with incense and judgment, finally broke the silence. "He speaks in riddles. He speaks in truths you don't like," Droll murmured. "He is dangerous." "So is the Emperor," said Illyrian. Within the chamber, the judges invoked the scripture of unsanctioned Sikana. It allowed them to conduct a test, once used in the earliest days of the Librarius, now reserved only for potential soul breakers, psykers, whose presence risked spiritual contagion. The rite was called Mirror of Flame. It would cast Mephiston's psychic resonance into a projection, an avatar formed of light and echo, visible only to null seers. It had only been used 5 times in the last millennium. 3 times it resulted in immediate execution. 1 time the subject vanished. The 5th. Mephiston. They activated the rite. Mephiston stood within the pillar of light. His armor flickered with heat haze. The air thickened. For those observing, the effect was subtle, but to the null-seers in the adjacent vault, what they saw was impossible. Mephiston's reflection did not appear as one form. It appeared as 7, each different, each clothed in different fragments of himself. A boy with red eyes and ash-covered skin, a warrior in golden armor not of the astartes, a robed priest carrying a book of blank pages, a figure in black armor crowned with flame, a mirror of the emperor, a beast of fangs and wings, and a shape of blinding white, featureless but watching. Each reflection moved differently, each whispered a word. Together they formed a phrase. I am the price of survival. The null seers collapsed. One went blind. Another forgot their name. The third began to laugh, not with madness but with recognition. Let him go, she said. There is nothing to judge. He already passed through death. The trial ended without verdict. No sentence. No absolution. Mephiston was escorted from the chamber in silence. No chains. No words. As he reached the surface of Terra, the wind howled through the Himalaysians, colder than steel. He paused, looked toward the palace in the distance. He did not kneel. He did not bow. He simply said, I still remember, and stepped aboard the ship that would return him to Baal. 3 weeks later, Inquisitor Illurian's personal data vault was found empty. No files on Mephiston remained, no transcripts, no vox logs, only a single phrase left burned into the screen of his private cogitator. Do not measure the flame, tend it, or be consumed. Some say it was Mephiston who left the message. Others say it was a warning from something else, something that lives in his shadow. Either way, the conclave never called him again. Not because they feared what he would say, but because they feared what he might become. And in the dark corners of Terra, among the witch hunters and holy judges, there is a new doctrine, whispered, never written. There are tools the Emperor once used that he no longer controls, and sometimes we must pray that they still choose to fight for us. Dreams are not permitted. Extract from Codex Sanguinius, Book of Flesh, line 9. His name was Arvin, and he dreamed more than any neophyte should. They told him it would pass, that the nightmares were a byproduct of the transformation, the neurochemical trauma of gene seed implantation, the pain of bone and soul reshaped into something more. But Arvin's dreams did not pass. They deepened, worsened, they took shape. And then they spoke. He dreamed of a library with no ceiling. Scrolls hovered in the air, circling like carrion birds. Each one bled ink. The shelves wept wax. The candles burned black. And in the center of it all stood a man in crimson armor, his face hidden by a helm crowned in thorns. Arvin did not know his name, but he knew to kneel. When he awoke, his skin was steaming. A warding symbol had been seared into his chest, a glyph none of the apothecaries recognized. They removed it surgically. It regrew by nightfall. The apothecarian kept him under observation. We've seen psychic echoes before, said Chief Apothecary Loran. Residual trauma, lineage shock. Sanguinius's blood runs deep. But one librarian, Isoriel, a lesser epistolary, requested permission to enter Arvin's dreams, to navigate what the boy could not. The chapter approved. He entered trance, and he never returned. The records of what Isoriel saw were sealed by the librarius, but fragments survived, whispers from other psychers, screamed out during meditation, muttered in sleep. One phrase repeated across every recollection: the dreamer is not dreaming. He is being remembered. Arvin, meanwhile, continued to transform. His muscles grew, his senses sharpened. He could hear the blood of others, smell their thoughts. But the dreams worsened. Now they included voices. He heard names he did not know: Calistarius, Vitaris, Solon V. Cryptus, Baal. He saw battles through eyes not his own, and in every dream the figure in red stood taller, more real. Then one night the figure spoke. It said, "Do you know what it means to drown without water?" Arvin tried to answer. He could not speak. The figure reached toward him, not in violence, but in recognition. "You are an echo," it said, "a thin string tied to something too vast to measure." "I do not want you," it added, "but you were given." The following day, Arvin's psychic profile lit up every sensor in the apothecarion. He was reading the thoughts of brothers 3 rooms away, repeating scriptures he had never been taught. He recited the apocryphon of the death mask in full, a ritual only spoken once a decade by the high chaplains. No one had taught it to him. Not even the codex knew where he had heard it. They placed him in stasis. Mephiston himself was summoned to inspect him. He stood beside the containment field for exactly 9 seconds. Then he deactivated it and stepped inside. The two stared at each other. One a boy barely removed from humanity, the other a psychic rift in the shape of a man. Arvin tried to speak, but Mephiston raised a hand. "You are not broken," he said. "You are listening." Arvin's eyes widened. "To what?" "To me," Mephiston said, "but not as I am." He stepped closer. "You are the stone that remembers the chisel, the flame that remembers the match. You are the wake I leave behind, the way fire leaves warmth, even after it dies." Arvin trembled. "Am I you?" "No," Mephiston said, "but I am becoming more than one." Later, in the Librarian, records were updated. A new term was introduced: soul recoil. It described an impossible event, when the psychic footprint of a powerful enough being echoes backward into the souls of those who share its genetic structure. Arvin, it was decided, had become an anchor point. Not possession, not mutation, just contact. But none could explain why the echo persisted, why the dreams deepened, or why other neophytes nearby began to dream of red temples, whispering books, and a burning sword whose name they all knew without learning it: Vitaris. Mephiston ordered the dreams recorded. What they found was unsettling. Each dream described a different event from Mephiston's past, but not as remembered by Mephiston. They were external, third person, like legends retold by the warp itself. And in each one, the dreamer described a moment where Mephiston turned, looked at them, and said, "You were watching." Even then, the chaplains grew uneasy. Some argued this was heresy, a spiritual contagion masquerading as inspiration. Others believed it was a miracle, the angel's blood finally beginning to teach, not just transmit. The decision was taken to seal the dreamers. Not kill, not exile, just place them in the vault of ember glass, where those touched by unsanctioned knowledge were kept until the soul could be mapped. Arvin went willingly, but he asked one thing of Mephiston before entering. "Will you finish the dream?" Mephiston answered without hesitation, "No, because it isn't finished yet." In the months that followed, Mephiston would return to the vault, not to speak, not to interrogate, just to stand outside Arvin's containment cell, watching, listening. And sometimes, when the silence was deep enough, he would hear Arvin whisper in his sleep, "I see you at the end. I see you after death. I see what comes next." And Mephiston, Lord of Death, breaker of the black rage, nightmare of the hive mind, would turn away. For there are few things in the galaxy that can truly unsettle him, and meeting your own echo across time is one of them. No records exist of Arvin's fate. His cell remains empty. No signs of escape, no body, no bones. Just a smear of red across the containment wall, shaped not like blood spatter, but like a letter. Some say it's the High Gothic M. Others say it is a glyph with no Terran equivalent. The Librarian refuses to comment, and Mephiston never speaks of it. But the dreams have not stopped. Not in Baal, not among the successors, not even among mortals. And across the Imperium, seers begin to note a new name rising in the warp. Not as a prophecy, but as a presence. Not Mephiston, not Calistarius, something else, something listening. There is no record of the campaign on Seraphis IV, no report filed with the Administratum, no battle honors claimed, no names inscribed on the obsidian wall of the Arx Angelicum, because the war was never official, because the enemy was not Xenos, heretic, or traitor. Because the enemy was us. The call came in the voice of a ghost, a fragmentary distress signal intercepted by a Librarian astropath aboard the Blood Requital during a patrol in Segmentum Obscurus. The signal had no origin code, no encryption key, only 7 words. We have remembered what we were. And at the end, one identifier, a word long since purged from Imperial lexicons, astartes novum. Mephiston was reading from the gene wound Psalter when the signal reached him. He closed the tome in silence, left the Librarium, and within a day ordered a detachment of the Blood Angels' first company to prepare for departure. No fanfare, no ceremony. He requested no permission from Dante, because Dante could not grant it. This was not a sanctioned war. This was a correction. Seraphis IV was a dead world by Imperial designation, declared Purgatus over 2 centuries ago following the failure of Project Mendax, an abandoned Astartes augmentation initiative intended to bypass the flaws of the Sanguinius line. No survivors, no data retrieval. The site was sealed, yet the signal had come from there, and so Mephiston went to silence it. He brought with him 20 Blood Angels. Not just warriors, witnesses, each chosen for loyalty to the chapter above the Imperium, each sworn to forget what they saw or to never return. No chaplains, no sanguinary priests, only blades, only silence. The surface of Seraphis IV was ash and bone. Black sand stretched to the horizon, burned structures jutted from the ground like fossilized teeth. Vox interference made all contact unstable. There were no birds, no winds, only the hum of radiation across cracked stone. But the Astartes were not alone. Not for long. The first contact came as they passed through the ruins of Citadel Hal. Figures in red armor, not blood angels, not quite. Their helms bore familiar contours, their pauldrons bore forgotten heraldry. They moved like space marines, spoke like men, but they had no chapter. They were remnants, and they had remembered what they were. Their leader called himself Thane Malthor, and he greeted Mephiston by name. "We sent for you," he said. "You, specifically." Mephiston said nothing. Malthor gestured to the ruins. "We failed," he said, "but we learned. And now we offer you what only we possess." He raised a hand, and into Mephiston's mind poured knowledge. They had found a way to suppress the Black Rage, not cure, not eliminate, suppress, permanently. A psychic rebalancing of the gene seed, initiated at implantation, created using a matrix of warp-dampening microtechs and pre-heresy soul fragment data. Retrieved from a cursed fragment of the Primarch's dream diary, once thought apocryphal. They had tested it on 12 volunteers. All lived. All were stable. None dreamed of the angel's fall. Mephiston listened. He made no comment. But those who stood closest said his aura changed. Not flared. Not burned. Shifted. As if a forest had gone still before a storm. Then Malthor made his mistake. He offered the process to Baal. "Help us rebuild it," he said. "We can restore what was lost. No more rage, no more death companies. a future for the sons of Sanguinius that does not end in madness. Still, Mephiston said nothing. He walked past Malthor into the depths of the facility. The Blood Angels followed. What they found was worse than heresy. The remnants had stabilized the gene seed, but they had paid a price. In a stasis crypt below the ruins, they found what was left of the 13th test subject. Not a Marine, a child, barely 14, cloned from recovered Baelite civilian tissue, implanted, enhanced, warp-blanked. He had no dreams, he had no black rage, he had no soul. Mephiston stood over the child's stasis coffin, watched the slow rise and fall of its breath, then spoke very softly. "This is not a solution, this is subtraction. You have mistaken survival for salvation." Malthor tried to argue, tried to speak of sacrifice, of the greater good, of a future without failure. Mephiston listened, then drew Vitaris. It took seconds. The remnants did not resist, not because they were cowards, because they understood. They had gambled with the blood of angels, and angels do not forgive. The child was left untouched, sealed again in stasis, its future uncertain. Mephiston marked the coffin with a single sigil, a broken aquila, the mark of impossible knowledge. Then he ordered the facility burned. Before they left Seraphis IV, he sent one transmission, encrypted. One way, no return signal. It was addressed to no one, and it read, "There are paths to freedom, but not all freedom is worthy." Upon his return to Baal, Mephiston said nothing. The first company filed no report. No questions were asked, but for weeks the librarians of the chapter noted a change in his psychic aura, not stronger, not wilder, just heavier, as if he had seen something that burdened even him. In time, stories of the Red Mandate would leak through the librarius halls, whispers of the campaign that wasn't, of a war against a ghost, of a decision made that no one else could bear to make, and of a boy in a box breathing still. Some say Mephiston visits that coffin in secret. Others say he never left Seraphis IV, that what returned was a shadow of a shadow. But all agree on one thing. Since the Red Mandate, Mephiston has fought harder. Not like a man defending the Imperium, but like one trying to deserve it. By the time Remiel arrived at Gravenhold's Reach, the war was already over. The battlefield smoldered, a continent-wide wound still weeping smoke and silence. The air reeked of ozone, of burned promethium, of warp taint, exorcised but not forgotten. The soil itself seemed bruised, blackened beneath the boots of the arriving Blood Angels. Fires burned in the distance, uncontained, as though reality hadn't yet noticed it was supposed to rest. He'd come not to fight, but to heal, to reclaim the gene seed of the fallen, to render final rites over those whose bodies had endured what their minds could not. But even before he set foot on the ash, he sensed it. Mephiston had been here, and the world knew it. There was a weight in the air, not gravity, but something older. It pressed against Remiel's mind, subtle but constant, as if the land was holding its breath. Around him, brothers of the Apothecarian moved with reverent precision, voxes muted, voices hushed. Even the youngest among them understood instinctively. This place had been altered. Where was he last seen? Remiel asked a sergeant who had survived the assault. The man's armor was cracked, caked with blood and earth, but his gaze was steady. The sergeant gestured eastward. He walked alone into the spires, 23 hours before the final wave fell. Alone? Yes, my lord, no escort, no orders given, only presence. Remiel nodded. That was often how it began. He followed the trail without speaking, accompanied by two of his junior aides. The path led through shattered ruins, once part of a hive's outer processing district. Now the towers were collapsed into jagged silhouettes, like rib cages of dead titans. Burned corpses lay scattered, both human and alien, though none bore visible wounds. It was as if something had bled their essence, not their flesh. Atmosphere remains saturated, one aide whispered. Residual psychic energy is still active. No surprise, Remiel murmured. The Lord of Death passed through. They reached the epicenter near what had once been a cathedral. It had no walls now, only a skeleton of scorched pillars and melted steel arches. But amid the wreckage, they found it. A sigil burned into the ground, carved not by hand or heat, but by sheer force of psychic will, a blood drop encased in a sunburst, the mark of Mephiston. And it still pulsed. Later, Remiel began the work. He moved from body to body, offering the apothecarian's rites. Each marine was catalogued, his gene seed secured, his memories preserved. But the dead were not all the same. Those who had fallen near Mephiston had changed. Some bore burned fingertips, as if they had reached towards something holy or unholy before dying. Others had died standing up, eyes open, weapons sheathed, no visible wounds. Several showed accelerated tissue decay around the skull, the telltale sign of exposure to concentrated warp force. None of this shocked Remiel. He had seen it before, but one thing gave him pause. Brother Narius, a devastator from the Ninth, had fallen in a kneeling position, arms outstretched, helmet missing. A faint smile remained on his lips, as if he'd seen something beautiful in the moment of his death. That night, the skies churned. Ash fell like snow across the ruins. Servitors reported brief signal failures. A Thunderhawk landed unannounced at the perimeter. Mephiston stepped from the hold. He wore no helmet, his crimson armor darkened with soot, his face unreadable, sculpted, still, serene. His eyes, those impossibly ancient orbs of cold fire, swept across the camp. No one spoke. Even the chirurgeons froze in their work. Remiel approached him alone. "My lord," he said. Mephiston tilted his head. "Brother Remiel, you were seen at the cathedral, alone." "I was not alone," Mephiston replied. "I walked with purpose." Was the enemy defeated? They were made irrelevant. There was no pride in his voice, no arrogance, just finality. Remiel looked past him at the Thunderhawk. He saw no prisoners, no spoils, nothing brought back but Mephiston himself, and perhaps something else. The Psykers would later report residual warp disturbances lingering in the armor's seams, like a song half sung, still echoing through the steel. The next morning, 3 initiates from the 10th Company were found whispering the same phrase in their sleep. "He has seen beyond the veil." They were moved to stasis. Another survivor, a mortal guardsman, clawed his eyes out when he saw Mephiston walking across the ruins. He screamed about a face made of flame and wings that bent backward. He was executed shortly after for fear of possession, but the chaplains remained silent. They too had heard stories. Later, as Mephiston departed once more, Remiel stood alone at the site of the cathedral. He looked out across the shattered horizon, where black sand met broken stone, where angels had walked and something greater had passed through. He found himself whispering a prayer, not to the Emperor, not even to Sanguinius, but to something unnamed, witnessed only in aftermath. He wasn't sure if it was reverence or warning. Mephiston was not a legend, Remiel thought. Legends are stories. Mephiston was a force, a reminder that not all salvation comes cleanly, that not all miracles feel like light, that some burdens are so vast only the strongest minds or the most broken can bear them. He healed bodies, but Mephiston changed souls, and whatever he was becoming, it was no longer fully Blood Angel. It was something the galaxy would eventually have to reckon with. And as the winds howled across Gravenhold's reach, the ash rose into the air once more, swirling in patterns that some claimed spelled a name, not Calistarius, Not librarian, not lord of death. Just one word: soon. Darmus 9 had already fallen when the Blood Angels arrived. The system had gone dark 92 days earlier. Vox silence, astropathic screams torn short mid-transmission. 3 regiments of Astra Militarum had been stationed there, along with 2 Black Templars crusading strike forces. None had responded. When the indomitable blade translated into orbit, they found no orbital defenses, no debris, no response codes, just a planet wrapped in storm. Beneath the clouds, the world boiled, geography restructured, gravity flickering in places, entire mountains now inverted. This was not a battlefield. It was a crime scene too vast to process. The detachment prepared for a standard incursion. But Mephiston did not wait. He descended alone, not as commander, as answer. They found him days later on the outskirts of the capital hive, standing atop a collapsed statue of the Emperor, eyes fixed on the skies above. Around him, the ruins shimmered, as if even the laws of matter hesitated near him. Captain Aragon of the 5th Company approached first. He offered the customary salute. Mephiston did not return it. "Stand your forces down," he said. "This is not your war." Aragon frowned. "Then whose?" Mephiston looked down, eyes dimming with something colder than contempt, pity. "This world has been marked by an echo older than chaos. What lives here now remembers what the galaxy forgot." The company spread across the hive outskirts, encountering pockets of resistance, but nothing they could classify. Cultists no longer fought. They simply watched, murmuring praises to a name that didn't translate. Their mouths moved without sound, their bodies bent at impossible angles, not from injury, but as if reality no longer remembered how spines worked. Chaplain Malthan executed 37 without trial. None resisted. All died smiling. The librarians sensed it before they could describe it. "This isn't a warp breach," said Codicier Bellon. "It's a reflection, something behind the veil staring through." And at the center of it all, beneath the hive's core, lay a chamber that should not have existed. No structure had been there before, no city records, no satellite confirmation. But now it was present. Made of bone and black stone, smooth as memory, humming with thought. Mephiston walked toward it without hesitation. The others followed, though no one was ordered to. The descent into the chamber was silent. No contact, no vox, no psychic speech. The stone drank all light. The walls bent sound, even bolter cams failed. What little audio was recovered later was a single phrase, repeated in dozens of different dialects. "We remember him." Inside the chamber, the temperature dropped without measurement. The air grew still, and then the door opened. It wasn't a door in the traditional sense. It was a perforation, a cut in space like someone had torn the world open and stepped aside. Beyond it was not the warp, not demonic architecture, but something else, something silent. Mephiston stepped through, alone. For 6 hours, nothing moved. No sound came, no signal returned. Then the ground shook, not from impact but from reversal. Whole sections of the hive began rebuilding themselves, architecture deconstructing and rewinding like a broken ritual made whole again. The cultists screamed and burned from within. The sky flickered, the storm vanished, and Mephiston walked back through the breach. His armor was blackened at the shoulders, his face unreadable. Vitaris was gone. No one asked what he'd done, because the warp was retreating. The demons were leaving, not fleeing, simply withdrawing like insects in the path of fire. It made no sense. There was no precedent. Even the Grey Knights, when contacted days later, could offer no explanation. Only one line from Lord Kaldor Drago passed back via psychic relay. Whatever he faced down there, it blinked. And he did not. The Blood Angels returned to orbit without ceremony. Darmus 9 had not been saved, but it had been released. What remained was a world scrubbed clean, not by flame, but by recognition, as though some presence had taken inventory and found the corruption unworthy of its attention. Weeks later, the records of the incident were sealed under segmentum-level quarantine. Mephiston filed no report. When questioned by the Inquisition, he offered only this: it was not chaos that made them worship. It was memory. Twisted, yes, but rooted in something truer than lies, something older than the warp itself. "And what did you do?" they asked. "I reminded it," he said, "that I am no longer part of the dream." No one understood the statement, but no one pressed further. Even the Ordo Malleus had begun to treat him differently, not with suspicion, with distance. Back on Ball, Mephiston returned to the Librarian and stood before a sealed reliquary. He placed his gauntlet on it. It opened. Inside, a blank page from the Apocrypha Sanguinius, a fragment once thought meaningless. He stared at it for 10 full minutes, then whispered something in a dialect no living soul could translate. The ink formed on the page, lines, symbols, a new addition to a scripture that should not change. And then he left it behind. No one knows what he wrote. But the next morning, the Reclusium chaplains who passed near the reliquary were found weeping without memory of why. Whatever had stared from the breach, whatever had looked through the skin of real space on Darmus 9, it hadn't come to test the Imperium. It had come for recognition, and it had found in Mephiston something worthy of pause, something it could not define. That night, as the stars above Baal flickered with solar interference, librarians across the fortress reported a shared vision, a single eye, not demonic, not divine, just awake, and in its reflection a figure in red, swordless, faceless, but still walking forward. They summoned him to the sanctic labyrinth beneath Baal. No orders, no demands, just an invitation, a rite older than the Codex Astartes, known only to those who bore the psychic touch and walked the halls of the Blood Angels' inner librarius. It was not a test, it was not a trial, it was a reckoning. And Mephiston accepted without a word. The labyrinth was not a maze in the physical sense. Its walls were stone, yes, but layered with 1,000 years of psychic residue. Memories soaked into the bedrock, trauma engraved by mind and flame. Every librarian who had undergone the rite of reflection had left something behind. Some left echoes, others left warnings. A few had never returned at all. Mephiston had never entered. Until now. 6 librarians stood at the entrance, senior psychers, hand-picked by the chief archivist of the Blood Angels, Codicier Valerian, Epistolary Thresk, Lexicanum Jael, and 3 others whose names were not spoken aloud. Each one bore the psychic brand of the rite, a sigil on the palm that would burn if falsehood entered their presence. Each one feared the man they were about to guide inward. Valerian was the first to speak. "You must walk alone," he said. Mephiston nodded. "I always do." The moment he stepped across the threshold, the air changed. Not colder, not darker, just thinner, as if the labyrinth did not support weight the same way real space did. The floor beneath his feet pulsed with memory. Voices whispered through the walls, not audible, but known. Familiar. He walked onward, and the labyrinth responded. The first chamber bloomed like a wound in thought. Here the walls showed images, not painted, not carved. They were the walls, moments from Mephiston's past projected in shimmering slivers. Calistarius, the name, the man, his death on Armageddon, his rebirth. He watched himself crawling from the rubble, blood streaming from his eyes, screaming at something no one else could see. He did not blink. The second chamber was a corridor, endlessly long, except it wasn't. Each step echoed backward, bouncing off moments that had not yet happened. At the end stood a shape, a mirror. Not polished steel, it was made of liquid reflection, and when Mephiston looked into it, he did not see a man. He saw 7, a robed figure in a golden circlet, a warrior in black with blade-shaped wings, a child standing in blood, a being of light and hunger, a librarian wrapped in flame, a shadow with no eyes, and in the center the man who had once been Calistarius. Each one stared back. None of them blinked. He raised a hand. The mirror split, not cracked, split. The reflections stepped forward, each taking a position in a circle around him. They spoke in unison. "You are not whole," he answered in silence. "We remember when you died," they said. "We remember what remained." He closed his eyes and whispered, "I am what was necessary." The third chamber held no floor, only falling. The moment he entered, he dropped, not physically but psychically, plummeting through layers of his own mind stripped bare by the labyrinth's touch. Memories flared and vanished. His first kill, the first time he saw the stars, the moment he looked into the warp and didn't look away. Then, the darkness, the place he had gone during the Black Rage, the place between life and death, where Calistarius had ended and Mephiston had been forged. Here the labyrinth pressed harder. It asked him, what chose to survive, not how? What? And then the fourth chamber, still, silent, a sphere of perfect white, no texture, no depth, just a place without language. The final chamber. Here the labyrinth waited, not to show him something, but to be shown. This was the rite's purpose, to give the subject a moment where the soul had no barriers, where selfhood stood exposed, where who he was would be seen without shield or shape. Mephiston stood at its center, and the chamber filled with eyes, thousands, orbiting him, eyes of librarians long dead, of psykers consumed by the warp, of chaplains who had once blessed him, of inquisitors who had failed to understand him, each eye locked onto him, each one searched. The silence grew unbearable, until one eye, massive and star-black, stared straight into him and asked, without words, "What are you now?" He did not answer, because Mephiston did not know, not entirely, not anymore. The eyes faded. The chamber collapsed, not destroyed but folded, returned to the substrate of reality. And the exit opened. Mephiston stepped out into the light of the upper librarium hours later. Valerian and the others waited, grim-faced. "What did you see?" Thresk asked. Mephiston did not respond. Instead, he extended a closed fist. He opened it. A small, pale stone rested in his palm, shaped like an eye but smooth, featureless. "A gift," he said. "To the library?" "No," he replied. "To the blood." He placed the stone on the altar reserved for the writings of Sanguinius, and walked away. Weeks later, the stone began to pulse, only once every 9 days, and each time it did, librarians across the fortress reported dreams they could not translate, dreams of burning mirrors and of angels standing at the edge of choice. No danger, no prophecy, just presence. And somewhere deep in the librarium, within a sealed vault, a new entry was etched into the book of unfinished souls. Mephiston. Soul pattern unknown, stability constant fluctuating, directive suspended. Let him continue. We are learning through him. They gathered beneath the vaults of the Aegis Eternal, the deepest hall within the Arx Angelicum, a sanctum sealed even from the Reclusium, a chamber where prophecy and memory had been exiled together. It had no name in official records. Among the librarians, it was whispered of only as the Still Room, and it had remained untouched since the days of the Great Rift, until now. Mephiston stood at its center, No ceremony, no audience, no blade in hand. He wore his armor, but not the mantle of his office. The crimson robes were absent. Even his psychic halo was withdrawn, as if the warlord had stepped aside and the man behind him had chosen to face something alone. Not as weapon, not as librarian, but as the final remnant of Calistarius. The still room was not stone nor steel. Its walls were not built. They had simply always been there, veiled in psionic fabric, too dense for mortal minds to measure. The ceiling was open to void, though no stars shone through. It pulsed with a soft tension like breath held across centuries. Before Mephiston stood a vault, circular, featureless, no lock, no key, because it wasn't meant to be opened. It was meant to remember what must never return. But now it called to him, not with a voice, with silence so complete it resonated in the bones. He had known this moment would come. He had known it since the day he awoke as something more than a man. Long ago, in the depths of the Black Rage, Calistarius had died. But what emerged was not rebirth. It was an answer to a question the Blood Angels hadn't asked yet. Now Mephiston stood at the edge of that answer, staring at the vault that had waited for him without prophecy, without warning, only inevitability. He stepped forward. The vault opened. Inside there was no relic, no cursed artifact, just a figure, perfectly still, suspended in a field of null space so pure it bled into the warp itself. A man in Blood Angel's armor. Old Mark VI pattern. His face was untouched by time, pale and beautiful, marked with the sigil of the old Librarius. He looked exactly as Calistarius had, in the final moment before he fell to the Black Rage. For a long time, Mephiston said nothing. Then quietly, "So this is where they kept you." His own voice echoed, not across space, but across memory. He stepped inside. The figure's eyes opened. They were the same eyes, same color, same weight. But where Mephiston's gaze carried command, this one carried judgment. Calistarius did not speak. He didn't have to. Mephiston already knew the question. "What did you become?" He approached. "I didn't kill you," Mephiston said. "I am not the thief of your life." Calistarius stared. "I was born in the moment you broke, not as shadow, as continuation." Still silence. Then at last Calistarius moved. He mirrored Mephiston's step, a fraction behind, like a reflection. Mephiston reached out. The air between them warped, not from psychic power, but from sheer identity conflict. Two things that had once been one now stood fully divided. He whispered, "If I give you a name, will you become real again?" Calistarius tilted his head, and finally he spoke. Not in words, in thought. "You didn't surpass me. You escaped me. And now you wonder if you are still worth what I was." Mephiston knelt, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement. He did not fear this echo of himself. He did not mourn it. He honored it, the man who had died so that something more useful might rise. "I remember," he said, "the pain, the loss, the silence." He looked up. "And the moment I decided to stop being only a son." The chamber flared with white light. Calistarius stepped forward and placed his hand on Mephiston's brow. And in that instant, memory flooded back. All of it. Every moment from before the transformation, every pain felt by Calistarius, every line of scripture forgotten, every friend lost in war, every heartbeat that carried fear, not wrath. He felt the man he had once been, and how far he had fallen upward. When the light faded, the chamber was empty. No vault, no figure, just Mephiston, standing in the center of the still room, alone once more, but no longer divided. He emerged hours later into the upper librarium. The other librarians turned to him instinctively, as if gravity had shifted. None spoke. They could feel it. Not power, not threat, just completion. Later that night, Chief Chaplain Astartes arrived in silence. He said nothing, as was custom between him and Mephiston. They stood at the edge of the chapter crypts, staring out into the night sky of Baal. "I dreamed of you," Astartes finally said. "I know," Mephiston answered. "You were speaking a name I had never heard." Mephiston looked to the stars. "I remembered who I was, and it allowed me to accept who I am." Astartes nodded. "The black rage still stalks our line." "I no longer rage," Mephiston said. "I listen." In the weeks that followed, something changed. Mephiston did not speak more often, but when he did, the words felt closer to prophecy. He led fewer battles, but those he joined ended faster. The chapter's psykers no longer feared echo contamination in his presence. The echoes now moved in harmony with their own. And in the Librarian, deep within the sealed books of the Apocrypha, a new term began appearing. Not written by hand, it simply appeared. A name, Arcanath, its translation unknown, its origin unclear. But every time it was whispered, the warp recoiled. And so Mephiston continued. Not as savior, not as pariah, but as a fulcrum, a being who had survived death, not through miracle, but through adaptation. One who now knew his name, not Mephiston, not Callisterius, not even Arcanath, just the one who remembered first.